Something shifted for me this morning, and I need to tell you about it before we get into anything else. I went to sleep last night with a very clear picture in my head about what was happening in Cleveland. I woke up and had to throw that picture out entirely. Let me explain why. You know how sometimes a practice happens, and the people who were there come away describing something they weren't quite prepared for? Not hype. Not the usual noise that comes out of OTAs when everyone's trying to be optimistic before a season starts. Something different, quieter, more serious, the kind of thing that makes football people stop talking mid-sentence and just watch. That's what May 19th apparently was at the Cleveland Browns facility in Berea, Ohio. And the more I've sat with the details, the more I've come to believe that something genuinely changed that Tuesday morning. Not just the mood, not just the narrative, but something in the actual competitive reality of this quarterback situation. To understand the full weight of what happened, you have to start with the story that existed before the first snap was thrown. Because walking into these OTAs, the first formal organized team activities under new head coach Todd Monken, there was already an established truth in the building. Deshaun Watson was leading this competition. Multiple sources inside the organization had been pointing in that direction since April's voluntary sessions. Watson had strengthened his relationship with Monken. Watson had the experience, the pedigree, the 3 Pro Bowl selections that represent genuine NFL credibility. And from a purely logical standpoint, it made sense. This franchise paid Watson a fully guaranteed $230 million. Organizations don't hand a quarterback that kind of money and then quietly push him to the side because a first-year player looked good at Colorado. The assumption, hardened through weeks of offseason reporting, was that Watson's spot at the top of the depth chart was Watson's to surrender, not anyone else's to claim. Nobody had properly accounted for Shedeur Sanders. I want you to think about what it takes to walk onto an NFL practice field for the first time in a formal installation session. A new offense, a new playbook, a new coaching staff's language, a defense actively trying to expose your weaknesses, and perform with the kind of composure that makes professionals stop and reassess what they thought they knew. That is not a common thing. That's not something you can fake or manufacture or talk yourself into. It either shows up or it doesn't. On May 19th, it showed up. 13 snaps, 7-on-7 and 11-on-11 team drills. Against a secondary that was disguising coverages, rotating safeties at the last second, compressing throwing windows the way NFL defenses compress them. Not softly, not cooperatively, but with genuine professional intent to expose him. Against all of that, Sanders completed passes above 90%. I know that number can slide right past you in a practice recap. Single-session completion percentages at OTAs, no pads, no real contact, get dismissed as meaningless. But I want to slow down and make sure you actually feel what that number means in context, because I think it's doing more work than people are giving it credit for. This wasn't a throwing session against air. This wasn't a showcase where receivers jog clean routes and coaches offer encouraging feedback from the sideline. These were NFL defenders, professional men whose entire job on that field was to make a rookie quarterback look confused and overwhelmed. And he was neither. He was precise. He was composed. And at moments, according to everyone I've heard from who was standing on that sideline, he was genuinely exceptional. There's a specific throw I keep coming back to. It happened during a 7-on-7 period in a drill built around pressure simulation, the kind designed specifically to test whether a young quarterback panics when the structure of a play begins to collapse. Sanders felt pressure coming. And here's the part I want you to actually sit with, because this is where everything becomes real. He didn't bail. He didn't do what scared or underprepared quarterbacks do, which is abandon the play the instant something feels unstable and try to manufacture something on the run. What he did instead is something that only quarterbacks with a deep, internalized understanding of pocket geometry actually do. He stepped up into the pressure, forward, with purpose, keeping his eyes locked downfield the entire time, not escaping the pocket, relocating within it. staying in the structure of the play while adjusting his platform underneath it. That difference between panicking out of structure and calmly relocating within it is one of the most important distinctions in evaluating a young quarterback. Offensive coordinators will tell you that one of those things is coachable in theory and almost never actually gets coached in. The other one is a feel that lives in a player's body before he ever steps into an NFL facility. Sanders showed the second kind. And then the throw itself. He was genuinely leaning backward when he released it. His base was off. His weight distribution was wrong. Every physical variable in that moment gave him a legitimate excuse to pull the ball down, protect the possession, jog back to the huddle, and accept a no gain. That is the veteran decision. That is what quarterbacks with years of NFL starts and playoff experience choose, because the math usually tells them the risk isn't worth the reward. Sanders didn't make the veteran decision. He held the ball past the point where most quarterbacks release, trusted his mechanics to do the work his body couldn't fully provide, and put a dart into a tight window between two closing defenders, arriving in Concepcion's hands perfectly in stride, perfectly on time, with an authority that made the defenders look at each other without speaking, because there wasn't anything useful to say. The ball was just there, one of the scouts present, and this detail has been working on me all day. Didn't say a word. He turned to the person beside him and nodded. Once. Slowly. I want you to understand what that represents. This is a professional evaluator, a man trained specifically not to get emotionally caught up in what he sees on a practice field, because emotional reactions lead to bad roster decisions. He has spent a career watching quarterbacks at every level of this game, from high school showcases to championship Sundays. He has no personal investment in anything that happens in Cleveland this year. He is paid to stay measured, paid to resist the pull of the moment, and even he just nodded. That's not nothing. That kind of reaction from that kind of person means something specific and serious. But I want to be careful not to let a single throw carry more weight than it should, because what made May 19th significant wasn't one moment. It was the accumulation of them. The pattern. Later in team drills, in an 11-on-11 period, Sanders lined up with the first unit on what should have been a clean, simple slant route to the right side. Familiar concept. Low difficulty red. Except the defense had diagnosed it before the snap. The linebacker was already sinking into the lane. The corner was pressing the route. Anybody watching the pre-snap alignment could already see the play dying before it started. The smart decision, the correct decision in most people's minds, was to take the check down, collect the yards, protect the football, and keep the offense moving. That's what coaches call making the right play. Sanders used a deliberate pause in his delivery to freeze the linebacker. Not hesitation from uncertainty. Not a young quarterback unsure where to go. A manufactured moment, a tactical choice, designed to hold a defender in place for exactly long enough. And while the linebacker was frozen, his eyes had already moved somewhere else entirely, to the back of the end zone, where a receiver had drifted into a corridor between a rotating safety and the sideline boundary. That window was real. It was open. And it was closing at the speed those windows always close in NFL coverage, which is almost immediately. He threw it anyway. Flat trajectory, tight spiral, a cross-body delivery that the majority of starting NFL quarterbacks, veterans, guys with playoff experience, look at and decide the risk doesn't justify what might be gained. The receiver caught it in stride. Touchdown. And what happened on the offensive sideline in the next 5 seconds tells you something important about where this competition actually stands. It wasn't polite acknowledgement. It wasn't professional appreciation expressed with a controlled nod. It was an eruption. The kind of spontaneous, unfiltered collective reaction you cannot stage or manufacture. The kind that tells you everything about where a quarterback already stands with his teammates long before any official depth chart decision gets made. Those players had already decided something. And when that ball arrived exactly where it needed to be, they reacted like people receiving confirmation of a faith they'd already quietly committed to. What made it even more telling was the defensive side. Some of those defenders reacted too. And if you've spent real time inside a football program, you know what that means. Defenders don't celebrate the plays that beat them. But occasionally, when something genuinely exceptional happens on the other side of the ball, you catch a defender shaking his head in a way that looks less like frustration and more like recognition. That's what witnesses described seeing in Berea that afternoon. A defensive player, shaking his head, not in disgust, but in a kind of involuntary acknowledgement that something worth acknowledging had just happened. That specific reaction doesn't occur every day on a practice field. Now I want to step back from the field itself for a moment and talk about something bigger, because this story doesn't exist in isolation. The Shedeur Sanders draft situation a year ago was one of the most contentious, most publicly debated events of the entire 2025 offseason. And I want to be fair about this, because there were legitimate football questions in some of those evaluation rooms. Processing speed under pressure, footwork consistency in the pocket, the quality of competition he faced at Colorado, the genuine difficulty of projecting any quarterback from any program to the NFL level. Those are real concerns, and they deserve to be taken seriously. But some of what was happening in those draft rooms had nothing to do with football. Most people who watched the situation closely knew that. Most were willing to say it quietly, even if they weren't saying it on camera. Quarterback after quarterback after quarterback went off the board ahead of a player who had done nothing on the field to explain falling out of the top 3 picks. A year later, watching him operate against NFL defenders in an NFL system on day 1 of formal installation, it becomes much harder to defend every one of those decisions on pure football grounds. It just does. And every strong performance between now and when this competition actually gets resolved is going to function like a steady, quiet reminder in the back of the rooms where those decisions were made. I do want to be balanced here, though, because I think reducing this to a simple narrative, "they were wrong, he's proving everyone wrong, close the case," actually does a disservice to the real complexity of what Cleveland is managing this summer. Deshaun Watson's experience is real. It is not nothing. The years he spent starting in Houston, the sharpness he demonstrated during his best stretches, the situational intelligence that only develops from genuine NFL playoff starts when the margin for error is a single decision. None of that disappears from a quarterback's processing just because a younger player looked impressive in May. Watson understands NFL defensive disguises in a way that a rookie cannot yet understand them. He manages 2-minute drives against hostile crowds with a composure that is earned through years of actually doing it. OTAs cannot simulate that pressure. The psychological reality of November football, with playoff implications and 70,000 people screaming, is a different environment than a spring practice session in Berea. Anyone who says otherwise hasn't thought about it hard enough. But football also rewards what you can do right now. In this system, for this coaching staff, against these defenders. In the present tense of May 19th, 2026, every account I've received says the same thing. The younger quarterback was the most compelling presence on that field, not because Watson failed, not because the competition is settled, but because what Sanders produced on day 1 exceeded what the people there had prepared themselves to see. And in this business, exceeding expectations on day 1 is how you change the trajectory of an evaluation process, sometimes permanently. The calendar still has significant distance to travel. OTAs continue in 3-week blocks before mandatory minicamp in early June. Then, training camp opens. Then, preseason games. Real game speed, real crowd noise, real consequences for real decisions. Each stage adds information that a practice session simply cannot provide. A 90+ completion rate on day 1 matters. The throws that stopped conversations in Berea on Tuesday are now permanently embedded in Todd Monken's evaluation memory. But this competition is not decided in May, and anyone claiming otherwise is performing a certainty they don't actually possess. What I will tell you is that something real moved on May 19th. The pre-written story, the settled, calcified consensus that this was Watson's competition to lose, no longer has a clear, unobstructed path to its conclusion. The coaching staff left that practice with information that genuinely complicates the picture. The scouts left talking quietly among themselves in the particular subdued way that happens when something forces a professional to reconsider what they walked in believing. And a quarterback who bought a house in Cleveland, stayed in that facility through the entire winter, showed up early to every voluntary session in April, and then walked out on day one and threw the football better than anyone realistically expected. That quarterback is no longer a secondary character in whatever this season becomes. The franchises that passed on Shedeur Sanders 12 months ago are going to spend a meaningful portion of this summer revisiting that decision, whether they do it consciously or not. And that scout's nod, one nod, slow, from a man who has trained himself for decades not to react to things on a practice field, is the detail I keep returning to. Because that nod was not about a quarterback who looked decent in his first OTA session. That nod was about something specific, something recognizable to a professional eye, something that arrives rarely enough that even people who see football every day of their lives know it when it finally shows up in front of them. Right now, today, based on everything I've heard from people who were on that sideline and everything I know about how coaching staffs and front offices respond when a player does what Sanders did on May 19th. I'm not betting against this kid. I was wrong about what I expected to come out of Berea on day one. I'm completely comfortable saying that out loud, and I'm even more comfortable saying that whatever the final outcome of this competition turns out to be, Tuesday morning in Cleveland is the morning the story changed.